Steve, is it okay if I get us started and then we'll wait for Commissioner Kuhn
We
or
have to wait.
like full stop, wait until she
Yeah.
gets here? That's fine. Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Made the whole check on that, so positive.
All right. We'll sit tight.
She said she might be able to
Understood. Yeah.
work. Oh, yeah, actually. It's been one of those things.
This necessarily go up. But the next time you do a report, you can change the size of your notes, but.
Loaded in.
Or you get on the thing.
I think like 12 years.
It's a 3-year term, right?
I think it's 2, but maybe it's 3.
I know the budget committee.
Okay.
It's like, I think last year I had told Don the. And I don't remember his title right now. Anyway, like, I don't think I'm gonna go for a third term.
Hmm.
And then he emailed me a month later. He's like, I would really appreciate it if you considered staying on for a third term. So I'm wondering if they have ever done that.
No, I've always like applied again, though I am. This year is like, do I want to do one more time? Ultimately, I decided yes. And then yeah. But I'm starting to have those questions and looking at other vacancies, on other Tualatin things. You know, to volunteer at library.
Oh, yeah.
Something else.
Yeah. I kind of thought, I'd like to give somebody else the opportunity. of
Sure.
Having a chance. That was my thing. And then, like, please, can you do it again? I was like, fine.
Mm.
I was. I missed out on. I don't. Yeah. You could try to find. Um, It was. Doing that, and then that's that, then that's hospitality is servicing. Yeah. So I wasn't that part of South, but Megan. About where she grew up. So. So I'm about to this option.
Okay.
I'm more in the central Illinois. And, I was outside of the next biggest city called Florida. But the community of Huntington is really small. We got our first four-way stop sign intersection. Back to high school. And, high school class. Yeah, so I think like.
He's more east.
Mhm. Yeah. I, That's out.
Yeah.
Side by side.
All right, good evening, everyone. I hereby call the April 17th, 2024 meeting of the Tualatin Planning Commission to order. Lindsay, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Chair Beers,
Here.
Commissioner Valley,
Present.
Commissioner Coon. Present. And Commissioner Weimer.
Present.
Thanks, Lindsay. Is there any communication from the public regarding items that aren't on the agenda? Is there anyone in Zoom land? Okay. All right, it will go right to our first action item. This is a public hearing, so there's lots of script stuff that I'll be reading. The first item is a public hearing on conditional use permit CUP 24-0001 to allow for vehicle repair limited to vehicle battery maintenance, service / replacement for only AAA members on a 1.87 acre site within a building located at 18155 Southwest Teton Avenue is called to order. The public hearing this evening will be conducted as follows. 1, staff report. 2, entry of additional correspondence received into the record. 3, questions by the planning commission of staff. 4, opening of the public hearing for testimony in the following order. First will be applicant or the applicant's representative, followed by proponents, then neutral testimony, then opponents, and then any rebuttals by the applicant or their representative. Part 5 will be the closing of the public hearing. 6, no other comments will be heard from the public or the applicant unless a question is asked by the hearing body. 7, questions of staff, if any, by the planning commission. 8, discussion by the planning commission. A decision may be made by the planning commission at the close of this hearing, or the matter may be continued to a time and date certain in the future. If the matter is reset to a time and date certain in the future, this will be the only notice of that date you receive. Part C regarding testimony. If you wish to speak, please wait for me to ask for your testimony and raise your hand or select the raise hand button in Zoom if you're joining us virtually. I will recognize those people wishing to speak. Any questions should be addressed through me. Please state both your name and your address for the record when you come to the podium, as the hearing will be recorded. Please keep testimony concise and to the point. For the deliberations tonight, the applicable substantive criteria are listed in the findings. These are the criteria the planning commission must use in making its decisions. All testimony and evidence must be directed toward these criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulations which the person testifying believes apply to the decision. Please relate any testimony to the listed criteria. The application before the planning commission this evening must be decided based on these criteria. Despite the importance of other issues that may be raised during the public hearing, the authority of the planning commission is limited only to those issues that address compliance with the applicable criteria. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford the planning commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the planning commission to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Part D, disclosure. At this time, I ask members of the planning commission to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest. Please indicate the nature and extent of the ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate or abstain from the hearing. I'll go ahead and start out. I am a AAA member and I drove by the site on the way in, but that's the extent of my contact. I'm not biased and I'll be participating in the hearing.
I am not a AAA member and I'm unaware of any bias I might have.
Okay, yeah, if you don't have any, you don't need nothing to declare. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any planning commission members' impartiality? Okay, we'll go to part E, which is the staff report. City staff will now present the staff report.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioner Beers and planning commissioners. My name is Keith Leonard. I'm an associate planner here with the city of Tualatin. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting conditional use permit CUP 24-001 0001. And it's again, as you noted, it's for vehicle battery testing and potentially replacement. Only AAA members would be allowed to use this use. And I'd like to enter in my staff report, the findings and analysis and all exhibits and attachments into the public record. So tonight's presentation will include a site background. I'm going to describe what a conditional use permit is, subject proposal, and then the applicable criteria, and I'll end it with some recommendations at the very end. So illustrated here is the location. It's kind of outlined in that bluish sort of line. It's located at 18155 Southwest Teton Avenue. The property is zoned light manufacturing, and you'll notice all the property around that property or around the AAA building is also zoned light manufacturing. And then to the north, there's an area of low density residential. And I'll be discussing that a little bit further later on. There's some distancing criteria that needed to be met. So conditional uses are uses that are appropriate in some areas and then maybe not appropriate in other areas. There might be something with the location, the size of the use, the nature of the use that requires additional consideration and a final determination made by the Planning Commission. So the application was submitted on January 23rd. It was deemed incomplete on January 31st. There was additional material submitted on February 21st and additional material submitted between January 31st or after January 31st, and then it was deemed complete on February 21st. The notice of hearing was sent out on February 28th, and the public hearing, we're having that tonight on the 17th. And the final decision is required to be made by June 20th. So the conditional use permit request is to allow vehicle repair within the light manufacturing zone. The use will be limited to only a vehicle battery service and replacement. There won't be any other sort of vehicle maintenance or that sort of thing done. The use, only AAA members will be allowed to use the service. Because this is a commercial use on industrial zone land, the use has other limitations. The third column of this table, there's a reference to Tualatin Development Code section 60.210.3. And what that indicates is that the property is located within an industrial area. It refers you back to map 10-4. It's a design type boundary map. And again, this is in the industrial design type area. It's a single tenant within this building. It's only AAA. This will also be limited to 5,000 square feet the use. And they're proposing that the use will occupy about 2,315 square feet. So we are under that 5,000 square foot mark. Here's the site plan. So you'll notice a blue line with an arrow driving in on the south driveway there. Customers will come in, they'll park within that kind of blue rectangular area. They'll go into the office. Also on the front, you start to see, but there's like a little line there that goes into the door there. They'll ask to have the service done. A AAA employee will come out. They'll pull the vehicle into the garage. They'll check the battery. They'll make any changes or any maintenance that needs to be done. And there is an area to the north where they're indicating the storage for the battery will be located. But once it's been fully serviced, if they had to replace it, if it's all okay, the AAA employee will come out or come on, drive the vehicle out, park it in the parking lot. And the member will then be able to exit the property and drive on home and continue on with their day. Conditional use permits are listed in section 33.040 and the criteria is subsection 5. So the applicant has, oops, sorry about that. Okay, let me start over. Conditional use permit criteria is listed in section 33.0405 of the Tualatin Development Code. The applicant has demonstrated through their application submittal that they meet the approval criteria A through E as described in the findings and analysis, including A, the proposed use is in the underlying zone requires a conditional use permit. Physical characteristics such as location is appropriate for the proposed use. The existing public facilities are adequate for the proposed use. And the proposed use will not alter the character of the surrounding area. With the proposed use being conducted within the fully enclosed building, and they're estimating about 2 or 3 employees, I don't think anybody's even going to notice that they have this sort of use unless you're a AAA member and you want to use it. Criterion E requires a review of the Tualatin comprehensive plan. For community involvement, the public was notified and we are conducting this public hearing tonight. For the economy, commercial and industrial development, the city wants to retain existing businesses and help them thrive. So that's a good motivator. For transportation, the city continues to support local employment and businesses, but we also want to make sure that the abutting properties and especially residential areas I pointed out to the north are also considered in this. So we do have additional requirements if a conditional use permit has to be located no closer than 300 feet to a residentially zoned property. In this case, it's about 330 feet to the center line of Southwest or Tualatin Road. And finally, the use will be closer to the AAA building than any residential use. So that's another requirement. We are recommending 4 or 5 conditions of approval. CUP 1 limits the use to vehicle battery service and replacement. CUP 2 requires the use to be located within a fully enclosed building. CUP 3 requires the use to comply with Chapter 63 environmental regulations. CUP 4 will only allow AAA members to utilize the service. And then CUP 5 requires the Clean Water Services Environmental Service Division that the applicant works with them for the battery storage and disposal. Through the findings and analysis and evaluation of the conditional use permit, the proposed use meets the approval criteria. As a result, staff respectfully recommends approval of CUP 24-0001 with conditions of approval CUP 1 through CUP 5. And that concludes my presentation. If you do have any questions, I'm here and happy to answer them.
All right, thank you, Keith. Think about what questions you might have. I'm going to move on to part F, correspondence. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the agenda materials?
No.
Okay. I am now going to open this up for public testimony, starting with the applicant. The applicant may now present their proposal.
Hi, you're welcome to present.
Yeah, you
We don't have a presentation.
okay.
He did a great job. He's been wonderful to work with. the whole
Okay.
process. Thought his presentation was sufficient.
Commissioners, this is a time though that we can ask the applicant any questions if we have them.
This include,
One sec, we'll let the applicant come up so we can get it on the mic. And remember, state your name and address for their
I'm
record.
Scott Thompson. I'm with AAA. I'm the facilities director.
I'm Willis DeWitt with Wolf Vulture Architecture. My address is 9025 North Geneva Avenue, Portland, Oregon.
All right, go ahead.
I'm just curious, a vehicle, does that pertain to business vehicles as well as like personal vehicles or is there a distinction?
There is, I'm assuming it would fall under our road service assistant. guideline. So in other words, a big utility UPS van would not qualify. You might have these little transit connect vans driving around. There's weight limits and so forth that we would do to have those restrictions. So the majority is going to be passenger vehicles.
And we're talking just like 12-volt batteries.
Yeah, your normal car battery.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Your everyday car battery that we all probably drove here in. Yeah. A few years ago, we started to provide service on the road. Instead of towing your vehicle on the road, let's just bring you a battery and get you going.
Hmm.
We started selling batteries on the roadside years ago. And this concept came about for people to be a little more proactive about their batteries.
All right, any other questions for the applicant from the commissioner?
Does AAA, does AAA manage any other service points like this in the area or?
You ask, we're the first one in the country to try this.
Okay,
So some of us, not sure how many people are gonna show up to be proactive about their battery. Most people wait till they die, right? And they're on the road. So, but a big part of our business is while we're servicing your vehicle, doing something else, we'll ask you, do you want us to test your batteries? Battery testing is a big part of what we do on the roadside for people now. That way they can be a little more proactive about their batteries.
in my day job, part of what I work with is prior land use and histories for environmental review and approval for development for public use. I'm interested to know what kind of outreach or compliance you guys may have already done to Clean Water Services or other organizations for compliance with TDC 65 for the storage and disposal of these batteries, especially if you do a brisk business, hopefully, and have a large number of batteries that have begun to degrade on the site.
Yeah, so our battery distributor will deliver batteries. They deliver them every Wednesday. And along with delivering new batteries, they will take away the old batteries. So once a week, no more than 7 days. And they're stored, the used batteries will be stored on for lack of better words, a plastic pallet with like a grate on it. So if they are leaking, it'll leak right within itself, within the pallet.
So self-contained with no communication with the outside.
And there's spill kits available and Terrier data safety sheets available in the whole 9 yards.
Wonderful. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you both. Do we have anyone online to testify? Okay, so,
I think it's a point where we skip through all the pleasantries about neutral.
okay, yeah, no questions or comments, so no rebuttal needed from you folks. Thank you. Does staff have anything to add which specifically addresses any question that we raised?
Yeah, just to follow up on your question. Clean Water Services I reached out to them and they responded by asking the applicant as a condition of approval that they do coordinate with Clean Water Services on the battery storage and disposal. So I think we should be covered. So, and I'll look for that from the applicant at a later date here.
We have a relationship with them. We have a car wash
Oh, okay.
at the site already, which they've been heavily involved in. So we have a contact there as well.
Okay, part I, questions of clarification. Does any member of the planning commission have any questions of staff regarding clarification of the testimony to this point? Okay. The applicant is allowed at least 7 days after the record is closed to all other parties to submit final written arguments in support of the application. Alternatively, the applicant may waive this 7-day period. Does the applicant choose to waive this additional 7-day period?
Yes.
Okay. Then the public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed. Now we will discuss it amongst ourselves. Are there any further questions from the planning commission of staff? Or discussion among ourselves? I feel comfortable
Can't
with this.
No questions.
I was satisfied with the conditions that
Yeah.
were, that are in the documentation. Okay, then, no other discussion? Is there a motion to approve application CUP 24-0001?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. All right, the motion passes. Thank you. You folks are welcome to stick around or leave, but that was probably the important part for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks for putting up with my allergies too. My eyes are watering and barely see the screen.
I can
I
empathize.
feel your pain.
And then I shrunk the size of the text. It's been one of those days.
All right, the second item tonight is the Planning Commission's recommendation to City Council on a city-initiated amendment proposal to comply with state mandated rulemaking known as Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities, CFEC, parking reform, and that's Plain Text Amendment 24-0002. And city staff will now present the staff report. Aaron, you'll be doing that. Excellent, thank you.
Right. Look at this mic. Good evening, chair viewers and commissioners. My name is Erin Engman. I'm the senior planner here at the city of Tualatin, and I'm joined tonight with Steve Coper, our assistant community development director. And as you've mentioned, we will be discussing CFAC and the state requirements for parking reform and how they affect our development code. So for our agenda tonight, we'll start with a summary of what CFAC is, where it applies, and why the state is taking action. We will then discuss how this affects our development code and what amendments are necessary to comply with the mandate. We will then discuss the approval criteria and staff analysis to support your planning commission recommendation tonight. And we will conclude with an opportunity to address questions before the commission is asked to make a recommendation to our council. So because we are technical folks, we love our acronyms. CFAC stands for Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities. And this mandate is a direct response to our past Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04. And that requires updates to land use regulations and transportation plans to encourage a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So as you can see on the visual, there is a gap of where we are today and where we hope to be in the future to meet our reduction goals. CFAC is implemented through the Oregon Administrative Rules and the Department of Land Conservation and Development, which is commonly referred to as DLCD. While the CFAC mandates also require updates to our more broad land use regulations in our transportation system plan, tonight's conversation is centered on the updates to our parking regulations. So CFAC applies to not only the Portland metro region, but other cities with a population greater than 100,000. So that would be the 8 metropolitan regions that you see on the slide here. So for background, I thought it might be helpful to share that minimum parking requirements aren't necessarily an exact science. They have been historically established by surveying nearby cities and consulting transportation engineers' handbooks. And because the minimum parking standards take a one-size-fits-all approach, some parking areas tend to get overbuilt. Or as uses and tenants change in a strip mall or shopping area, it could be found that more parking is needed than is already developed on this constrained site that is needed to comply with current regulations. So as you can imagine, this becomes a regulatory barrier for some businesses trying to locate in our community. And kind of as a last aside, parking can be costly to build, and sometimes that cost is shared with the tenant. So it's found that when minimum parking standards are removed, developers will still choose to provide parking. Usually that's a requirement to obtain funding for their construction. And when less parking is required or necessary, the thought is that more destinations can be constructed with closer proximity to one another, which in turn will support options to walk and bike in commercial and employment areas. I'm sure when most of us are doing our errands at neighborhood woods, we don't necessarily walk from one end to the other. We'll probably choose to drive from one tenant space to the opposite end. So what does CFAC include? It requires cities to remove minimum parking requirements. It requires regulation improvements for pedestrian connectivity, tree canopy, and surface lots over half an acre. It requires new commercial and multifamily development to include electric vehicle charging conduit, and it applies parking maximums to our downtown and along frequent transit for multifamily and some commercial uses, as well as large buildings. We'll get into those details on the following slides. So on this slide, I was trying to demonstrate that there's various goalposts for this regulation, and some of it's already in effect. So while our code has not yet been amended to comply with these various components of CFAC, our practice would be to apply the applicable Oregon administrative rules to development applications that were submitted after these effective dates. And we're hoping that this update to our code will provide greater transparency of the state requirements to future developers. So now we're going to transition and talk about our code amendments and what those look like. So just for some context, at the beginning of the year, council directed staff to comply with the CFAC rulemaking for parking reform and to go ahead and remove minimum parking requirements. The updates will affect 11 development code chapters, and I'll provide some preview of that on the following slides. So with this, I won't necessarily read this to you, but I'll let you spend some time with it if you kind of want to get familiar with what's being amended in the various chapters. And then we'll go into particular details too in subsequent slides. A few more chapters. And then moving on with our presentation. This slide is meant to highlight the various changes to our parking chapter 73C, which is kind of seeing the bulk of our amendments. On the left are the existing sections of our code, and on the right are the newly proposed sections. So you'll see that it kind of gets condensed down. And what I want to highlight is that staff will propose combining and clarifying the purpose and applicability statements for parking loading and parking lot design. Right now, those are kind of broken up amongst the various sections. We're also looking to reorganize these sections for better usability, cleaning up some numerical sequencing. You can see that currently we jump from 60 to 100. So we're kind of keeping with the numerical theme. We will be removing joint use parking and core area parking district sections, as those are no longer needed for CFAC compliance. And we are looking to consolidate parking lot landscaping sections when requirements were largely the same between various uses. So previously we had different sections for commercial, industrial, and institutional when they were all essentially the same. We actually added some sections too for parking, calculating parking lot area and tree canopy coverage to better comply with the CFAC, to comply with the CFAC requirements and provide that definition and basis of what those requirements are. On this slide, I wanted to highlight that the proposed changes to our parking lot design standards. You can see on the left, this is our existing code again, and it includes kind of a long list of standards that weren't that well organized. It kind of rambled. So now staff is proposing to bundle like standards for applicant usability. So you'll see that standards that apply to circulation have been bundled, same with screening requirements and such. These have also been expanded to include the required CFAC design standards, which again, I'll highlight on the following slides. So one of these standards is electric vehicle readiness. So as you can imagine, there are aggressive goals to promote electric vehicles and slowly phase out the sale of new gasoline-powered vehicles. And as such, cities need to help facilitate infrastructure for the electric vehicles to fuel up in the future. So what the state is requiring is that new development provide electrical conduit to service type 2 chargers at commercial and multifamily developments. So when we're looking at commercial developments, it would be a minimum of 20% of the provided parking. And if there's a multifamily residential component for mixed use development or standalone development, that would be up to 40% of the provided parking. They're also making sure that we have some parking lot coverage standards. And this is mainly to make sure that we make more efficient use of our urban lands. So this would be a maximum parking lot coverage for larger developments, which is set at 65,000 square feet. And they're saying that the parking area cannot exceed the proposed floor area of that development. As we see in this visual, it's about equal. And then transitioning into the tree canopy requirements. At a high level, the state now requires tree canopy standards for parking lots under half an acre. And this is set at 30% coverage. And when you're looking at the larger parking lots, they are requiring trees along driveway entrances, in addition to providing a climate mitigation, which I'll get into on the following slide. And for purposes of tree canopy, the state has set a standard that it's calculated using the expected tree crown at 15 years after planting. So for parking lots that are over half an acre in size, they will be required to provide a climate mitigation that is either the installation of solar panels or additional tree canopy at 40%. And if we're looking at a public project, they may elect to invest in green energy. So perhaps like a green or LEED development. CFAC also includes a maximum parking requirement. I just want to highlight that parking maximums are presently included in our development code and are broken down between zones A and B, which is similar to what CFAC requires. Zone A includes the town center, which is also referred to as our downtown, and along corridors with frequent transit routes. And this is defined as 20-minute service during peak hours. As you can see on this visual, the zone A is shown in the darker gray overlap, and then zone B is just anything else that's remaining in the city. So CFAC goes one step further than what we currently have in our code to establish parking maximum thresholds for multifamily development and most commercial and retail development in zone A. But it could be noted that the new threshold for retail uses is not a substantial change to what we currently have in our code. And if you're curious about the multifamily requirements in zone A, studio rooms would be capped at 1.2 spaces, and non-studios at 2 spaces a unit. So we're kind of in the home stretch. I provided a staff analysis and findings for you that address our approval criteria for statewide planning goals, and Oregon administrative rules, Metro Code, and our own development code. And we found that this is largely compliant with those requirements. It's also a state mandate, so it's a thou shalt. So with that, I'm kind of wrapping up my presentation and asking that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval to City Council for these proposed CFAC parking reform amendments under case file PTA 24-0002. And with that, I'll just open it up for questions of staff. So we can no longer require minimum. Oh, maybe.
Someone doesn't know. like, say, typically, like, space, 1.5 spaces. That used to be exact, all of that. Obviously, it's not a requirement.
So as I understand it, and Steve might want to add to this, but typically when they're working with a development team, they'll be working with traffic engineers, and they'll probably be doing their own market analysis of what's needed to support their development proposal. So through their consultants, they'll probably get an idea of what parking would best be successful for their site. I'm sure they could always ask questions of staff, but I don't know if we would be making specific recommendations unless.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I mean, the way in which a recommended parking level would be arrived at would be basically extrapolated based on the level of vehicle traffic generated by a specific use, and so the applicant would
Mhm.
have access to that data. And I think particularly we're gonna potentially be having some future code amendments that deal with clear and objective standard requirements to our code that in general we're kind of, I think, from a policy standpoint, transitioning away from like anything that's not just actually a regulatory requirement in black and white, kind of across the board in general. And so I think that that's kind of the regulatory landscape is shifting away from like shoulds or
Mhm.
coulds and more towards you either need to do this or otherwise it's kind of up to you to structure your development as you see fit.
Yeah, I think I broadly like that. I'm just, we're losing something. Like I could right now look at our code and know like in a neighborhood what the parking should be for this thing and how they arrived at that. Like me as just Bill Beers, not a
Yeah.
developer, and that will be lost now. Like no citizen will know what normal parking is like in a neighborhood or
Yeah.
for a thing.
That's true. I mean, I think the thing, and we didn't cover it in this presentation because I think I kind of gave you a little mini presentation on the why no parking versus one of the other options that we presented before council. And the why was the fact that CFAC already had another series of regulations that are already effective that basically eliminated parking requirements everywhere except for our single family zones.
Yeah.
And our single family zones were really just 2 spaces per unit. Pretty simple, a 2-car garage and maybe a driveway, or a single car garage and a driveway. So I think in that sense, I don't know that there's necessarily a whole lot of mystery around it. I think that the more mysterious, at least in my mind, uses are like a mixed use commercial of like, how did you, if you have ground floor retail and then 4 stories of housing, how did you arrive at a 76 parking space garage? And that we've already been kind of stripped of that already effectively.
Understood. I've got more questions, but I don't want to hog the spotlight.
Can you just remind me if this is granted, does it only follow the current tenant or the property henceforth?
I don't think I heard the question. Could you repeat it?
Sorry. Can you remind me if this is granted, if it only follows the current tenant or if it follows that tax lot forevermore?
So it essentially applies to new development. And if a site was looking to redevelop and they improve their parking lot down to gravel, some of these requirements could be
Like,
born onto their land use application.
Tangentially related to one I wanted to ask, could the library restripe their lot and get rid of all the compact spots and just have fewer normal spots?
Potentially. Yeah.
Okay.
That was actually tangential to one of my questions. Does CFAC carry any burden for mandatory redevelopment or reconstruction of existing infrastructure, public or private?
No, there's no
This is
mandatory. It's
only
just when they
for moving
redevelop.
forward, when something organically happens, it would be to these standards, okay.
Just go back to that question. Did we, because we had a cap on the percentage of spaces that could be compact. Well, did we remove that as part of that? Because it's not. Not sure. that we did.
So I think it's capped at 35% compact.
So that cap didn't change.
Correct.
So to answer your question, to answer your question about the library, there's a cap of a maximum of how much in a development, how many spaces can be compact. And so even though there's no parking minimum, however many spaces a business or a residential development chooses to provide, whether it's 10 or 30, they're still capped at having 35% of those spaces maximum be compact. So if they're gonna provide parking, they can't do it all compact.
Oh, yeah, understood.
Okay, just want to make sure that was clear.
Gotcha. Other questions? I've got some more.
I've got a couple, but I'll wait for you.
Okay, regarding the electric vehicle requirement for, is it conduit only? Like you only have to put service in?
Correct. So the idea is that it's cheaper to put in the conduit line
Mm.
while you're developing. They're not necessarily required to add the charging stations, but just have that facility in place. So when they are ready to improve with the charging stations, they don't have to tear up the pavement.
Okay, so conduit with wire capped, that's what's required by the law. Okay. Sick.
For the 40% tree cover requirement in CFAC, does that contemplate any sort of variance for alternate uses for cover, or is that mandatory green cover? For instance, I've always thought that covered parking and solar collection make for a very interesting pairing of large open spaces. Is there any flexibility there, or is it mandatory that you can only do coverage and it has to be 40% trees, nothing else?
It's a good question. So with the larger lots that are over half an acre, you get a menu of climate mitigations you can choose
Okay.
from. So it could be the solar power, or it could be the tree canopy, or
Okay,
it could be a combination of the both.
all right, that makes sense.
And then if the structure, if it's a structured parking lot or a covered parking lot, then it would be subject to that, but you don't typically see that for the
Right.
larger.
Yeah.
So,
With the 65,000 square foot and greater development equivalency between the floor, pardon me, square footage of the development and the parking lot. Is that referring to the overall building footprint or just the interior, like publicly available or commercial space of the structure?
the way the mandate's written is the gross floor area of
Gross
that
floor area.
development.
Okay. Honestly, I'm just, nerding out over a bunch of this. I love this. So, I don't have another question that comes immediately to mind.
Is there any, when you get into the tree part, do they distinguish between like deciduous or evergreen or just tree?
They don't, they do provide runway if we did have an arborist on staff to provide a list of recommended trees that might fulfill these requirements. But I don't believe we have
think there is like, it's intended to be like an at maturity standard though, so I think that would probably guide people in a lot of cases towards deciduous rather than
Mhm.
evergreen, just because that's an easier way to meet the standard.
Okay.
My one concern here is that we'll get more and more Bradford pears.
Well, when you go back to our landscaping, it's prohibiting fruit, so hopefully we won't see so much of those nuisance fruits dropping from trees.
Did you say 5 years or 15 years for the,
15 years.
so in 15 years, somebody goes and measures the trees in a new parking lot and they say this doesn't cover 40% of your parking lot, what would then happen?
So I don't believe it would be that nitty gritty or come to code enforcement. I think the concept is just that we know that certain trees develop certain tree canopies. So that when you're working with your consultant team as a developer, you would just provide that standard to your landscaper and he would recommend trees that would fulfill that. And you would likely show that on a sheet in your development application that it would meet that requirement.
Does the parking lot development code have any requirements regarding permeability of parking surfaces?
Surprisingly, no. I think some of those standards were perhaps already adopted in the past, but they haven't revisited any of those standards.
Does Tualatin, are we considering any permeability or pervious surface requirements for future parking development?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, not insofar as requirements. I mean, there is the opportunity to, I think there have been a couple of examples where there have been constraints or challenges meeting stormwater requirements through like other means of capture and treatment
Mm-hmm.
in having development doing that, but as far as it becoming a mandate, no.
Question about redevelopment versus new development. You said it applies to new development. I'm just thinking of if we had a situation like one of the apartment complex that upzoned to more dense, would they doing that kind of redevelopment, would that trigger a need to add in the electrical service for their new redevelopment?
Potentially, I believe the multifamily component is baked into our building code. Or if they were looking to make any improvements to their pavement down to the gravel, I could see that being required as part of the application.
It's definitely possible, I think, based on their development plan, that it could affect them.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, it also could affect them in the other way, in that they could also choose to
eliminate some spots.
vote so far. What I understand with that particular project is that it's not going forward at this point.
No,
We had,
it's the only one I could think of.
I know it's a good question, because that was one of the ones we internally discussed.
Oh.
Because we like went through and kind of identified like, what are projects that we have kind of in the queue that like could be coming up that could be affected by this, just to kind of understand what the impacts might be. Or like projects that had been recently approved that hadn't gone through construction, that might just simply want to basically go back through land use,
Mm-hmm.
like, or do a modification just simply to attain different standards. I think in general, our sense is that a lot of developments, because of the fact that they have so much invested in the design that they have already, that it may take a while for that to kind of run its course, and where developers are going to start looking at things differently. I mean, that was one of the things we also internally discussed, is that by and large, with few exceptions, most developers were interested in providing above the maximums that we had for things, whether it was apartment complexes or whether it was industrial development, kind of irrespective of it. So it may be quite a while before people look at, the whole goal of CFEC is to try to get developers to look at land utilization differently. And so it may still be for us suburban communities a while before that shift really truly takes place.
Steve, any other questions for staff right now?
Um,
Okay, oh, sorry.
Oh, since this is state mandate, what happens if we don't adopt these things?
Well, I mean, so a couple of things, just a little bit of history, I guess, to answer your question. The deadline for this was originally has passed, but we applied for an exemption in order to take more time to study like the different options, including, you know, but not limited to this removal of parking minimums, and then provide a menu of options for the council to provide us guidance on. And so, I mean, in the short term, if for some reason, like the council is really ultimately uncomfortable with this, you know, we could apply for another extension, I suppose, and have more time to think it through further. But I mean, if we effectively communicated to DLCD that, you know, we thought it through and we decided we're not going to do anything whatsoever, then on, I guess, July 1, I think the parking minimums would just go away. They'd be removed. But as you can see from Aaron's extensive presentation, it's not really just as simple as that, you know, several word phrase, removing parking minimum citywide. There was a lot of like work, and Aaron did a lot of work. Our also credit to the rest of our planning staff who assisted like in reviewing and reviewing this, because there were lots of like interrelated threads and things like the manufactured homes in residential areas requiring a parking garage that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of when we thought of removing it. And so the other like downside is that every time we had any kind of development inquiry, if we knew that we were effectively operating under state law, it would be a real headache to kind of like examine every single like scenario one by one. And so the answer is like, we could not, but it doesn't seem like a great option.
It's more of a rhetorical, does the state take over kind of thing, as opposed to, I'm not negating the work that you guys,
No.
you did a lot of work. I'm just wondering if it's,
No, it's a great question. And I appreciate all of the questions tonight. We appreciate you having this sounding board and like, because we did a lot of like, you know, internal stuff, but it's great to have someone outside, you know, kind of, you know, test what we thought was the right path. The state law basically just applies directly. And so we've seen that with other state mandates in the past, like where, you know, previously we had, for example, accessory dwelling units. We had a requirement that each one provide a parking space, and then state law came in and said, no, you can't do that anymore. And we, for actually a brief period of time, were operating with a code that was out of compliance with that until the planning commission made changes that was part of the middle housing, and we tucked that into it. And so we just were not able to apply our own rules is the answer. And so we'd have to do it in a way that was compliant with the state. And I guess if somebody disagreed with our interpretation of applying state law directly, then they would have to appeal that determination. So I hope that answers it.
Any other questions? All right, have we received any correspondence on this matter other than items included in the agenda materials?
No, we haven't.
Okay, and do we have, Lindsay, do you have anyone online to give testimony on this item?
We do not.
All right, and no one's here, so we'll move on to questions of clarification. Does any member of the planning commission have questions of staff regarding clarification of the testimony to this point?
no.
Okay, are there any further questions of staff from the planning commission? And is there any discussion by the planning commission? Like internal to us? Then I will make the motion that we forward a recommendation of approval of plain text amendment 24-0002 to city council. Second from Commissioner Kuhn. All those in favor say aye.
Enthusiastically, aye.
Aye. And nay, no nays. Okay, the motion passes. And then we've got any communication from the commission for city staff? Okay. And then, oh, I do, well, maybe commit, not to staff necessarily, but I just belatedly did my Oregon economic interest filing thing a little bit late.
SEI, yeah.
Anyway, if you haven't done it, I think you should probably do it.
It's $10 a day for the first 14 days and then $50 a day after.
Will they send me a bill?
I think so, actually.
I'm gonna owe them some money,
You're only 2 days late right now. So,
Yeah.
you know,
$20.
I did it today too.
I'm gonna see if they'll waive it. Okay, any commission or communication from the city staff to commission?
First of all, thank you all for the 4 of you coming and making a quorum. Also, thank you for those of you that were able to make the special meeting last month. Just gratitude from our staff just to be able to keep those amendments going. Next month, May 15th, it looks like is going to be our meeting. We're having, because we had some great questions from the commission about public transit when I presented an update on our transportation system plan. We're tentatively having TriMet and TriMet and Ride Connection representatives come to give a little presentation about kind of what they do and answer some questions with the planning commission. Because it's really kind of above my pay grade as far as I think some of the questions that were raised by the commission. And then we will also be having just a quick little presentation of a certificate to Daniel Bachhuber, who is stepping down from the planning commission. But appreciate him for his years of service. And we'll begin a recruitment this week for a new planning commissioner. So if you know anyone who's interested,
Encourage them to apply.
please.
Okay.
That's all I've got.
All right, thank you, Steve. Do I hear a motion to adjourn
Motion to adjourn.
in a second? I'll second it. All right, we're adjourned.
Don't you
Thank
need to bang
everyone.
the gavel again?
Oh, yes. I've got the gavel back.
I know, you should use it.
I think you could say, hear you, hear you.
This is our final.
Oh, I was gonna ask, do I need to come in, but